I would say before you jump in head first, ask yourself a question. Do you have the DNA of an entrepreneur, yes or no?
Mm,
And in most cases, the answer is no. I would say that to become a successful entrepreneur takes a tremendous amount of grit, resilience,
hmm.
and ability to take the pain and get back up. It will
Yeah.
be a very painful journey. You got to know that before you launch yourself. If you ask me right now, it's not. I can't prove it scientifically, but by experience, just empirically, how many people actually have what it takes. If you
Mm.
are one of those persons, you're a 5%er. You're 1 out of 20.
Hey everyone, this is Devin Miller here with another episode of the Inventive Journey. I'm your host, Devin Miller, the serial entrepreneur that's grown several startups into 7 and 8 figure businesses, as well as the founder and CEO of Miller IP Law, where he helps startups and small businesses with their patents and trademarks. And if you ever need help with yours, feel free to go to strategymeeting.com, and we're always here to help. Now, today we have another great guest, and I say all great guests, another great guest, because they all really all great, and Dom is certainly no exception. We have Dom Einhorn, I think, and I just learned right before the podcast that Einhorn means unicorn in German, and so it was a suiting. And if you're unicorn company or anything else, maybe you should start calling yourself an Einhorn instead of a unicorn. But anyway, quick introduction to Dom. So he runs several tech focused incubator that has several different projects. Has been trying to, or has been accomplishing, letting entrepreneurs and inventors know that they have a different way. Backing up just a bit, so he was actually, I think, a professional prize fighter for a period of time. Did 3 years of service for France, I think it was, and he fought in Chad. And you can correct me wherever I'm wrong. Then came back from fighting, quit, decided to do startups, and then did I think a pre-internet kind of a billboard for travel. Did in '93 did some things for Yahoo as Yahoo Search, or built a development company. Did website building. Did that for a period of time, and then bringing it up to where he's at today. That's kind of morphed into I'd say tech advantage company for marketing and PR to help companies and businesses. With that much as an introduction, welcome onto the podcast, Dom.
Hey, thanks a lot for having me, Devin. Pleasure being here.
So I got to say, the other thing I learned, I like two things about your name, because you have Einhorn, which is unicorn, which is really cool, and then the other thing is it is completely aside, nothing to do with your journey. But I'm a car guy, so I like Fast and the Furious, and one of the main people in the show, their name is Dom. So I like the name on both fronts, just because I like Fast and Furious, and I think unicorns plays well to businesses.
Thanks as much. Yeah. It's funny because when I go to German tech conferences, the first thing they ask me is, when did you change your last name?
You're like, no, I've always been a unicorn. It's just me. So
Since way before it was fashionable, since way before the term was coined.
exactly. Well, let's now dive a bit into your journey. Now that I've told you how much I like your name, and that it's true as well. But take us back a little bit in time, and I think you said kind of where it starts is you were a prize fighter for a period of time and did that for a
Yeah,
little while.
yeah. It was in the 80s, and actually that's what got me onto the journey of becoming an entrepreneur. So
Hmm.
in the late 80s, I was booking my travel on the predecessor ancestor of the internet called the Minitel, Minitel in France,
Hmm.
which was a DOS-based bulletin board, for lack of a better term, that allowed you to book travel more efficiently than via a regular travel agency. So I was hooked early on
Hmm.
with technology. Then later on in the early 90s, I moved from France to the US, spent 25 years there, and came back in 2018 to create Unicorn. So I started early on as a
Well,
digital
let
media
me ask, just
entrepreneur.
before we dive in, and we'll definitely get to that. But one question I've got to ask, so as a prize fighter, so is it boxing? I assume with prize fighting, is that
Kickboxing.
right? So
Kickboxing.
is what is it? It seems like that would be a fun and exciting thing where you get to do it. Were you any good? You say prize fighter, so I assume you won some prizes. But give me just out of personal interest, just because I think it sounds cool and exciting. How was it to be a prize fighter, and was it a fun and exciting career? And what made you decide to kind of get out of it?
Well, injuries got me out of it.
Hmm.
Getting my behind kicked got me into it. Like a lot of them. So I learned how to defend yourself. In the 70s and early 70s, I started very early.
Hmm.
Had some nice little accolades. Yes, had a very good track record. Fought professional for several years including in the US and Las Vegas, which is what early on got me to Las Vegas. My strength coach was from Las Vegas, actually. And one thing leading to another. So, booking my travel for four tournaments, four fights is probably the reason why I ended up getting into tech space, because I was intrigued with it. I also always knew, there is probably life beyond that, fortunately, right? And I see this today because I happen to also be the largest shareholder of the local rugby team here in France, in our town. And I have 7 professional rugby players that work with me here at Unicorn. And we're trying to actually put together a Rugby Plus program where they get to perform on the field and also off the field, and helping them, reconvert later on in their careers, and actually, instead of walking away and being just lost, actually having a career waiting for them.
No, and I think that first of all, it's cool that that they had that opportunity, and I think that they would make great employees, and certainly know how to be competitive, how to work hard, and how to be to get that competitive edge. Now, one thing, and then we'll dive into a little bit more what you're doing with the business now. But so after you did prize fighting for a period of time, did you go into the military service before you got into startups? Is that
Yeah,
what I
actually,
recall?
it was pretty much concurrent, because the French military school I went to, it's in France, is a little different than the US when it comes to actually academics and sports. It's changed a little bit, but in France, you have to make an early decision as to whether or not you want to be smart or you want to be an athlete. They don't really give you the option to do both, unfortunately. Going through Ivy League military school was the only exception, which was one of the reasons why I joined. So I did a 3.5-year stint there, and didn't intend of making that a long-term, play either anyway, because I had 2 older brothers, grew up in a middle-class family. My mom and dad were stretched financially, and that was my way of actually getting education and doing what I love at the same time.
Well, that's a cool way to tackle several different goals of, hey, first of all, I have this skill and ability to do prize fighting. Second of all, I'd like to get an education. Why not do it all the time? And then finding a way to be able to afford and to jump into that. So now kind of going to where you were starting. So you came out of the military or got out of prize fighting, wasn't, and I'm guessing, we've had a few other professional athletes on the podcast, more so in football and basketball. But it seems like, a lot of times you get into, hey, I love this, but either one, I'm not going to be able to go professional, or I'm not going to be a long-term profession, or 2, I got an injury, and so either way I have to pivot out of that. And and not that you may not already have that inclination anyway. So you did that. You've been using the travel bulletin board kind of pre-internet, and so then I think you talked about, and we chatted a bit before, that as you were kind of getting into the startup, it was, if you were doing kind of web development, you were one of the first 3, I think you said, that was on Yahoo in 93.
Yeah, it was 93, but back in 93, you probably remember, if you're old enough, you probably remember the times where we used to call it the information superhighway before calling it the internet. For about 18 to 24 months, that was the term being used. And actually, Yahoo, technically speaking, wasn't even a search engine. It was a human curated directory of web links. Before Alta Vista, Web Crawler, and Lycos came about. Those are predecessors to Google today, right? So search.
And I always like, not that I think it's even around, I think Ask G was about the same.
Yeah.
Time
The butler.
I loved Ask G. Now I don't know how good it was, and it's been long enough ago. That was always my go-to, because I just thought it was a cool one. So
yeah, and then they became Ask. They bought the domain name ask.com, which took them like 3 years to acquire, because the owner didn't want to sell for a long period of time until the offer was good enough they could afford to pay a nice price tag for it.
Well, fair enough. So you got into web developer basically when the internet was barely a thing or just becoming of age. How was that? Was it lucrative? Was it difficult? I mean, nowadays you take it for an advantage, right? In the sense that there's a lot of web developers. Everybody, if you don't have a web page, people wonder what's wrong with your business, or they want, that unless you're in a niche industry, almost everybody has at least a web page. Some of them are great, some of them are horrible. I always like to joke that most law firm web pages are terrible, but it's one of my favorite pastimes, as a complete aside, to go find terrible law firm web pages. But as you're getting in early on and starting into that industry, how was it as far as was there demand? Were you having to convince people they needed a web page? Was it difficult to make a web page, or kind of give us an insight there?
Yeah. So I was trying to sell websites before people knew what a website was, right? So in many ways, it was like selling ice to Eskimos. And I actually was able to coin my own term, which is 36/1. And it's pretty much a tale of grit and persistence. 36/1, what it means is that I took close record of how many calls I needed to make to sell a website in 1993 and 1994. And it took me 36 connects. So it took me 35 failures to get to one success.
I'll give now. I got it now. Just because you gave that, I'll give you the other similar analogy, which is, do you know WD-40, right? What WD-40
Yeah, I
is?
do. Yeah.
You know where what WD-40 stands for?
No, weeds for W.
I think I'd have to double check on the WD. I think it's water dissipation or something of that nature. But the 40 is what I always find interesting. 40 was a number of different mixtures or different configurations he had to try before he got to what works today. So similar to what you did, 39 failures of, hey, this doesn't work, this doesn't lubricate right, it's not, or what it is. And then when he got to 40, that was the one that we use today, and that was one that worked. So kind of just an interesting aside of kind of that similar 35 failures to get to the 36 success. That was where WD-40 comes from.
You Americans are a strange breed. That's why you also need 33 different flavors of ice cream before you like one, I guess.
I guess so. So now going back from the rabbit hole, the side. So you're doing the internet, you're making websites, you're having to tell people why they need this when the internet is just barely becoming a thing. How did you kind of take that and grow the business, and how did that evolve?
Well, it went actually a lot easier afterwards. I mean, the initial year or two were very difficult, where we just, again, tried to sell ice to Eskimos, but we did sell some ice to Eskimos. So we just barely survived. And it was just pure grit and just make the dials in order to make a living and just survive and stick with it. And then I would say after Netscape 1.0 came out, right, 95, 96, where the internet really became ubiquitous. People knew what it was. More and more people, started inquiring about what a website was, what they needed, why they needed to have one, what is a URL, why it should be in your catalog, right? It gives you an additional way after facts on demand before that to promote yourself. So it was very incremental, but we got into a situation between 1997, 1999, where because we were early movers, literally everybody and their brother called us and wanted to have a website at first. And then we quickly got into digital marketing as an add-on, right? Now that you have a website, you have to promote it. How are you going to promote it? Early SEO, right? Lead generation.
I got a question, and I know I'm usually I don't have these many questions, but apparently your journey is just one that resonates. I just have a lot of questions on the web development. So I've done a bit of it. I think it's interesting and it's fun, and I do it some. I now have a marketing team that helps with a lot. When I originally did the law firm website, I did it myself. I built a few others, so it wasn't I started from scratch. But that one is at least, I use Shopify, and that's a longer reason as to why, and there is motivation for why I did it. But I got to imagine back in the day, there really wasn't the website building tools, and it was a lot more rudimentary, and it wasn't like you have all the resources you did today. So did you have a background in website building, or did you just say it was
not at all? Not at all. So I surrounded myself. I was the sales and marketing guy, and I hired web developers who basically initially they were HTML coders. And that's what they prided themselves on, right? It was all written by hand. There was no tool that would actually make this, this creation process systematic like there is today. Little anecdote: in 1998, I was using 800 times less bandwidth than I'm using today, but my monthly bandwidth bill was $8,500 US in 1998. In 1999, 2000 is when we really got into e-commerce, when e-commerce really started to gain ground. And basically, you needed to have a database. The only kid in the block was an Oracle database. One server license cost $32,000 US, right? So if you wanted to launch a business at that time, unless you raised $500,000 to $1 million, you had no point being in business. Right.
So I think it's a much different dynamic. Now you can have $30, go put up a website, and you can build it yourself. Not saying that as optimizer is good, but you can definitely, the costs have come down and makes it much more competitive.
100%. So, I mean, what you've seen is you've had a massive democratization, massive demonetization of the process over the last 25 years. So today you can create a new business instantly, right? You can, if you look at hackathons, they basically create businesses within 48 hours over a weekend, right? But by the mere fact that everybody can do that today, you also have tremendously increased competition, and the playing ground has completely changed. How do you stand out from the crowd, right? So I think for all of you digital marketers out there, for all of you creative entrepreneurs, I think this is your calling, right? Because it's no longer, you no longer differentiate yourself by your ability to code, because if you look at the no code, right, theme, that's pretty much permanent, present everywhere today, where you can create any application without any just drag and drop, right, pieces into one place. The real differentiator is not there anymore, right? The real differentiator is how to be different from anybody else, clearly while still solving problems instead of inventing them. Because as a result of anybody becoming an entrepreneur today, very often what we see, for example, people knocking at our door, is they sometimes seem to create the problem while offering the solution. All right, that's not a necessarily good idea, not necessarily a good business model, right? There are still plenty of problems out there to solve, a lot of friction points across any domain and any industry. Focus on those, right? But don't try to invent problems for the sake of ultimately solving them.
No, I think that is a great piece of, or a great piece of advice, and I do agree that there are those industries where they've tried to create the problems just so that they can offer the solution, and then you're really just paying them to fix a problem that they created. But now, as we go back a bit more to your journey, so now you've got, you started in web development, didn't have necessarily that experience, but then were able to get into it, branched out a bit. You're saying, okay, now we've got web development, but we've got to help on the marketing side, and how do you kind of early days SEO type of thing, but get them found, get a return on investment, and make it worth what in those days was even all the more expensive. And then how did that, so doing those, and I think you said that the very first website you built, if I remember right, was a fertility product for horses.
It's correct. The brand is still, I'm not sure, I think the brand is still around. It was called Pregnant Mare. So it was interesting, because I remember that day where I had pitched, to sell the first website, probably pitched 200 businesses, right, to get the first one. And lo and behold, it's something I had no idea about. It's a pregnancy product for mares, right, for horses. It was strange because that's what I thought would have been the last one, right? So I had some very interesting little ventures as well, because at one point in time, I created the first website to request physical catalogs online. I believe it was 1995 or so. And it was called.
There's a bit of irony now that you created a website to request physical catalogs when, for all intents and purposes, the internet has now killed physical catalogs along with most of paper news.
Yeah. But
things have come full circle.
But think about this: how many times back then, the way a mail order business, which is a term that's hardly even used anymore today, but the way a mail order business promoted itself is via classified ads. Call 1-800, right? Yep. Blah blah blah. Request a free catalog, and then slowly you started seeing URLs being inserted into those classified ads, right? So we thought, wow, when you look at customer acquisition costs, the average magazine, take a Better Homes and Gardens, and I had a contact there, and they were telling me, look, it costs an advertiser roughly $35, $37 to generate a free catalog request. So we thought, look, we can do this cheaper online, and we created emailman.com. Emailman was a catalog request form. I have no idea what it is today, but it's an interesting little anecdote, because you're an attorney, so I'm going to talk to you tell you a story about attorneys. At one point in time, I get a phone call from an attorney. He says, hey, you have emailman.com that belongs to my client, this domain. I was like, well, clearly not, because, I'm running a business on it. How does it belong to him? So we started calling, he started fighting, et cetera, right? And I said, look, you can do whatever you want. I've been running this website for 2 years now. Or maybe, if you have an offer to make, make an offer. So he gets off the phone, he talks to his client, he comes back and calls me, and now he's talking to me like a businessman. He's no longer the lawyer. He's starting to negotiate. And I ask him, I have a business, but how badly do you need it? Let's figure something out. Maybe we can work together. And then he just lets the cat out of the bag. And he says, well, my client just printed 850,000 catalogs with the domain on it, emailman.com, blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, we settled on a price, and I sold it 48 hours later. But it was very,
And those are usually, if you're real shrewd, and if you wanted to leverage them, you're saying, I could pay, or I could sell this for quite a bit, because otherwise their two options are either pay what you're willing or what you're asking for, or they have to go reprint a ton of catalogs.
But you think about it, this would never happen again today, right? So, but
Mm,
you saw this all the time back 25 years ago, where people would just assume, wrongly so, that the
mm,
domain was readily available or go file a trademark, not checking whether the domain has actually ever been used, right? Didn't even know how to check. Because I
mm,
remember sitting with an old client of mine, that was 1993, and we were sitting at networksolutions.com, and he made a killing, made millions of dollars buying Vanity 800 domain names. So Vanity 800 numbers, sorry. And I
mm.
was sitting there with him at Network Solutions, typing in dollar.com, travel.com, anything.com. They were all available for $70 at that time,
And
right?
you should have bought all of them, and you would have made a
I
huge
was I
killing.
was broke. I was 23 years old. I had just gotten to the US. I didn't have a dollar in my pocket.
So the
Convince
complete
him.
one other complete aside, just on the pricing now of URLs and that. So we have a couple URLs, and I'm probably a bit of a URL hoarder. I just like to have them because they're easier. They're easier once you need to buy them, to have them in hand, than once or somebody else owns them. But if you're to look at patents with an s.com, what would your guess be as to what that is selling for right now?
My question is, do you own it?
I no, I don't own it. I would love to own it. I don't own it.
What's it going? What I would say between 750, 1.5 million.
You're right on. It's one, or they want over 1 million. And same thing. So my last name is Miller IP Law. If I wanted to go and buy Miller.com, same thing. Both of those are over $1 million. And just astounds me that I get why they could, or why they're selling. It's a short name, it's easy to do, but just shocks me how much URLs or some of them go for these days.
So, I mean, going back to the gentleman I was sitting down with, who again was the 800 number hoarder at some
Mm,
point in time. One of them that we typed in, we touched base later in the early 2000s, because one of them we had typed in that was available was business.com,
mm.
which Sky Dayton, the founder of Earthlink, purchased, I believe, in 2001 or so for 9 million US.
Wow.
That's when he called me up and he told me, that was the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life, not listening to you, because we could have bought them all, right? And actually
Yep.
be billionaires within 2 hours. Just buy dollar.com, just buy business.com, travel.com, and a few others, and
If
you'd
you'd
be done.
only known. So,
That's
so
right.
now let's diving back just a bit to your journey, because that's a rabbit hole that we could chat out all day. But getting back a bit to your journey, so you did that. You did web development. You expanded your services over a period of time. Did a few things. Now take us up to kind of where you're at today, is because I think the same genesis of the startup, the same business, is still what you're running today. But you've morphed it, and you've also got into a bit more of investing and leveraging technology and that. So maybe tell us a little bit how that's morphed over the period of time and where that brings you at today.
Sure. So still today, I'm pure tech, right? In the incubator and accelerator, that's all we incubate and we accelerate. I think the core difference is that I've morphed for the last eight years or so more into an angel investing position.
Mm,
The reason for that is that I think there is a huge gap. I call it the expectation gap between startup entrepreneurs who tend to pitch on FM and investors who tend to listen to AM. And they don't communicate very well. And if I go back to 1993, the first time I was sitting in front of an investor, I was very excited about explaining to him my digital marketing startup.
mm.
And after 10, 15 years, his eyes were glazing over, and I lost him very, very quickly. And then I thought, well, I better shut up and let him speak. So he spoke in his finance lingo, and I was completely lost when he talked about, are you seed funding, pre-seed, are you Series A, what level are you at? And I had no idea what that meant at that point in time.
You
So
just
fast
nod your
forward.
head and say yes. Whatever answer will get me.
Yeah, good point. Yeah. So fast forward 28 years, it's a little better, but
Mm,
there's still a lot of ground to make up, right? So the main reason why we created Unicorn is to actually somewhat fill that gap. And I think what you're seeing today is you're seeing more and more former entrepreneurs, tech entrepreneurs, who are actually becoming angel investors, who have been there, who have done that, who understand the intricacies on both sides of the table, right?
mm,
And can serve as a liaison, right? So for example, perfect ecosystem, because it's driven by supply and demand, is, very much like Uber or Airbnb. If you only have drivers, no riders, you have a problem, right?
mm.
If you have too many riders and not drivers, you have a problem as well. Here, it's supply and demand between the startup entrepreneurs and the capital, right?
Mm,
Having 50 startup entrepreneurs with great concepts and promising startups and no capital is no good. Having only but capital and no startups is not good either. So you have to maintain a balance between the two, and you have to make sure that the two understand each other and can communicate properly. So that's part of what we do here,
mm,
where some of the concepts, obviously, because tech is so advanced today. So if you're getting into AI, 5G, augmented reality, virtual reality,
mm,
unless you're specialized in the field, you tend to get lost very, very quickly. So you have to build this ability of dumbing concepts down and
mm,
making these concepts accessible for an angel investor who's not necessarily well versed in those fields, right?
mm,
And then we've built our internal filters inside of Unicorn, where if everything checks out, everything is, we look at financial metrics first and foremost. That's done by CFA partner, not myself. Assuming everything does check out, it comes on to me, and the first thing I look at is product market fit.
mm,
I look at the team, and then last but not least, I look at our ability to scale what they currently have very rapidly, specifically on the acceleration side.
mm,
And on that note, we specialize in certain domains where we're just better than others, specifically in the mobile space, mobile app space.
mm,
We currently rank number one in the app stores for 5,000 keywords in 17 different languages.
mm,
So we have the ability to accelerate certain businesses much faster than others, especially if they're mobile first.
mm.
And we do this in travel, we do it in fintech, we do it in AR, VR, we do it in sports predictions, in some markets where legal, sports betting, where we're number one for hundreds of keywords, focusing with a hard focus on customer acquisition and on scalability.
Mm. No, and I think that that's cool. And I mean, it's interesting, and it seems a bit of a common theme is if you're a successful entrepreneur, if you've done some good startups, if you've had a good career, then at some point you almost become an investor. And some people, if they're taking the cynical approach, say, well, now you just want to go make a whole bunch of money, so you become an investor. But I think that a lot of times seems like more so the real commonality is, hey, I've done this a few times, I've been successful, I've ran some great companies. Now I want to give back and help kind of the next generation to build those next technologies, the next businesses that are going to kind of or help to help things to evolve and to grow and even become better. So it sounds like kind of on that
It's
after
very
you
much,
had
yeah,
it.
yeah, 100% right. I think, the most exciting part for me today is to be able to, what I usually tell young entrepreneurs is that, look, I cannot necessarily tell you what it is that you should be doing,
Mm,
but I can tell you with almost certainty what it is that you should not be doing. So I think this hands-on approach is somewhat lost. I think one big thing that's missing is this mentoring in the field.
mm,
And again, we work with attorneys, we work with accountants, we have digital marketers in house, we have great graphic designers, great developers, etc.
mm,
For you to come in knowing that you're not on your own, because there's nothing worse than the lone wolf entrepreneur, right?
mm.
You
Yep.
get depressed, you hit a hurdle, you don't know how to resolve it, you bang your head against the wall for weeks on end as a developer because you hit that hurdle. When, hey, if you're in the right ecosystem, you lift your hand, there's a helping hand there, the guy shows you, well, here's the line of code that's making it not work, fixes it on the fly, and you move forward, right? So
Yeah.
it
No. And
allows you.
that I'm nodding my head yes, and or agreeing with you, because part of why I started this podcast was because, especially if you're a solo entrepreneur, even if you have one partner, it's still much of a lonely journey. It's still, you can get depressed. It's a lot of hours, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of uncertainty, it's a lot of stress, it's a lot of juggling lots of hats and dealing with a lot of things you've never dealt with before. And so definitely to have that ability to have a group or other people that can be mentors that you can work with, that you can have those connections, I think is invaluable when you're trying to do a startup or a small business.
Yeah, I mean, first question I asked myself before I started Unicorn was, look, what would I build for myself 25 years ago? What
Mm.
kind of resources do I wish I would have had back then that I didn't have? And how can I assist some of these same startups by building a virtuous ecosystem that
Mm.
actually helps them on every single level?
So we could dive into a whole lot more, a lot of rabbit holes that I would love to discuss, and I would have a great time. But keeping it within the confines of the time we have for the podcast, I'm going to jump to the two questions I always ask at the end of the podcast. So the first question I always ask is, so along your journey, what was the worst business decision you ever made, and what did you learn from it?
I think the worst business decision I ever made was to go to first investor.
Mm,
And what did I learn from it is that to never do it again. Number one. And number two, to actually make sure that whoever you get in bed with, be it an investor or a startup, because it could go either way,
mm,
is something you're willing to do for the long term, because you kind of like married, joined at the hip for a little while. It's you want to make sure that it's not just an emotional decision that you make very, very quickly, not an impulse buy as an investor, and vice versa. If you're a startup entrepreneur, make sure that this is an investor that you actually want to have as part of your team, because he can hurt you in more ways than one. Be sure he's a strategic investor that brings more than money to you. He has a Rolodex.
hmm
He can help your business grow, but also, first rule of thumb is, and I haven't fished in a long time, but what I usually ask myself is, would I go fishing with that person, or would
mm,
I seclude myself in times of COVID or pandemic into a log cabin with that person for an extended period of time? If the
mm.
answer is no, regardless of how good it sounds, don't do it, because sooner rather than later you're going to get to a point of friction, and it can really, really threaten what it is you're trying to build.
No, and I think that you always hear kind of take the smart money, and there's other well or worn out terms that do that, but there is a lot of truth to that in the sense that you're gonna when you take on an investor, it's the same a lot for all in purposes. It's the same thing as taking on a partner. I would say a lot of what you said, taking on a business partner, has the same feel as to it. You're going to spend a lot of time with them. You're going to have disagreements. You're going to have ups. You're going to have downs, and it's every bit as much of almost as a marriage, in the sense that you're with this person for the duration of the business, unless you buy them out or unless they leave or other things. But you're going to deal with them, so don't just take the money. If all they have to offer is money, if you're not a good fit or it doesn't make sense, you wait till you have the ones that are a good fit. They can offer more than money. Not that money doesn't help a business, but make sure that it's a good fit. So I think that is definitely a good lesson, or something, a mistake that can be made because you're wanting the money, but definitely a good lesson to learn. So as we now jump to the second question, which is, if you're talking now to a startup or a small business, what would be the one, if they were just getting into it, so somebody's just getting into a startup or a small business, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give them?
I would say, before you jump in head first, ask yourself a question: do you have the DNA of an entrepreneur, yes or no?
Mm,
And in most cases, the answer is no. I would say that to become a successful entrepreneur takes a tremendous amount of grit, resilience,
hmm
and ability to take the pain and get back up. It will
Yeah.
be a very painful journey. You got to know that before you launch yourself. If you ask me right now, it's not, I can't prove it scientifically, but by experience, just empirically, how many people actually have what it takes. If you
Mm.
are one of those persons, you're a 5%er. You're 1 out of 20, right?
Yeah,
So
and I
if
think,
you're,
and that's why a lot of times I think businesses don't make it after the first year or two. And it's, there are definitely a lot of businesses, look at the statistics, that they don't last the first year or two. And certainly after 5 years, some of it is bad ideas, or you can blame it on the economy, you can blame it on other things. But I think, to your point, a lot of it is just, do you have the DNA, or when you hit those hard times, and every business does, do you have the DNA to push through and to make it and to pivot and to figure it out and to or keep going?
yeah, I mean, ask yourself some very fundamental questions that actually, like, I mean, there are some testy questions. So let's assume you lose all of your money.
Mm,
Can you live with that and actually continue to push forward? Yes or no?
mm,
Let's assume you ruin a relationship as a result of trying to grow your business. Can you live with that and push through it? Which one is more important, right? Yeah, it's almost politically incorrect to actually ask those questions, but it will happen. You're going to
mm,
be in those situations where you either have to throw in the towel or continue. So the only thing you got to ask yourself: do I have the grit? Do I have the resilience to push all the way through? Okay. If the
mm,
answer is no, or if you're doubtful, it's a no. It's not yes. You shouldn't even start if you're asking yourself. And then most people, you see it when you're actually talking with the entrepreneurs, you see the passion, you see the drive, right? They
mhm,
will say, I don't care. Yes, absolutely, I'm going to stick through thick and thin, right? If that's the
mhm,
case, if you are that person, that type A, go for it.
mm. No, and I definitely agree with you, and I think there's a lot of wisdom there, and I think that sometimes it's hard to know until you've done it. So that's the other thing that I think sometimes try it, get into it, and see if you have that DNA. Because sometimes it's a balance. On the one hand, if you don't have the DNA, you're not going to last very long. But it's also, hey, sometimes people don't know and they get in. They always have this what if, or I wish I'd tried this, or I wish I'd done it. Sometimes you get in, you say, okay, I don't have the DNA, I don't have the grit for that, and then you can live the rest of your life as you're more happy with your career and the other things you're doing, and always have that. So sometimes the best way to find out if you have that DNA, try it out, see if you can do it, and if not, then you're not left wondering for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have what it takes, it means you're going to fail. So it's much cheaper to
Yeah.
not even start.
No, no, that is an absolutely a fair point. Well, as we wrap up, as people want to reach out to you, they want to find out more, they want to pitch you with an idea, they want you to be an investor, they want to be an employee, they want to be your next best friend, any or all of the above, what's the best way to connect up or connect up to find out more?
I probably LinkedIn, Dom
Mm,
Einhorn, Dom Einhorn, Einhorn. Website is unicornincubator.com. That's unicorn with a Q. My direct email is dom@unicornincubator.com.
mm,
And for those of you who want to meet us personally, good time to do that would be October 1, 2, 3 for the Startup Supercup,
okay.
startupsupercup.com, which will bring 1,000 people together, 100 plus startups pitching,
Mm.
and a lot of media coverage.
Awesome. Well, I definitely encourage people to find out any or all of the above. Reach out to Dom, whether it's whatever way is the easiest. You definitely do the incubator this in the August, and participate in that. And there's a lot of cool things that you guys are doing. So definitely a lot of resources there. Well, thank you, Dom, for coming on. It's been a pleasure. Now, for all of you that are listeners, if you have your own journey to tell, we always love to share it. So feel free to go to inventiveguest.com and apply to be on the podcast. Also, make sure to click subscribe if you haven't already so you get notifications as all our awesome episodes come out, and leave us a review so new people can find out about the podcast. Last but not least, if you ever need help with patents or trademarks or anything else with your business, feel free to reach out to us at Miller IP Law by going to strategymeeting.com. Thank you again, Dom. It's been a pleasure. It's been fun, and wish the next leg of your journey even better than the last.